Back in Grandma's day, a fridge wasn't always an option. Families had to get creative just to keep food safe, fresh, and edible. From clever tricks with salt and sand to secret hacks with honey and wax, they found ways to stretch every meal without wasting a crumb. And here's the surprise. Many of those old methods still work today. So here are 20 shocking ways Grandma stored food without a fridge that might just save you in tough times. Wax sealing. Long before plastic wrap and modern freezers, families turned to wax as a natural shield against rot. By dipping eggs, cheese, or even fruit into melted beeswax or candle wax, they could create an airtight coating that shut out oxygen and moisture. Once cooled, these sealed foods often lasted up to 6 months in a cellar or pantry. The beauty of this method was its simplicity. No fancy equipment, just a pot of melted wax and some patience. For Depression-era homes, it meant extending the life of staples like butter or hard cheese when replacements weren't easy to find. Wax sealing might look old-fashioned today, but in those days, it was a small act of brilliance that kept families fed. Smoking. In Grandma's time, smoking meat wasn't a backyard hobby, it was survival. With electricity scarce and ice costly, smoking turned perishable cuts into food that could last months. Families built smokehouses or used simple sheds, feeding fires with hardwood and herbs. The slow exposure to smoke not only dried the meat, pulling out dangerous moisture, but also infused it with flavor that masked any rough cuts. Cold smoking preserved fish, cheese, and sausages for the winter pantry, while hot smoking made pork, beef, or game safe to eat later. In lean years, every bit of protein mattered, and smoking kept families strong. Today, the same method can protect food from spoilage while delivering taste that no fridge can rival. Lacto-Fermentation, harnessing good bacteria. When fresh produce threatened to spoil, Grandma turned to fermentation. Using only salt, water, and patience, she could transform ordinary vegetables into jars of tangy, nutrient-packed food that lasted for months. Cabbage became sauerkraut, cucumbers turned into pickles, and carrots gained a sharp, refreshing bite. The science was simple but powerful. Salt created an environment where good bacteria thrived, while harmful ones couldn't survive. As the days passed, vegetables soaked in brine released lactic acid, preserving themselves naturally. This method not only kept food safe, but also boosted its nutritional value and flavor. In the Great Depression, it meant a steady supply of greens even through the winter. Today, it's a method anyone can revive, no electricity required. Rendering lard and tallow. Nothing went to waste during the Depression, not even fat. Families rendered pork fat into lard and beef sweet into tallow, creating cooking staples that could outlast the season. The process was simple. Chop the scraps, simmer them slowly in heavy pots, then strain out the liquid gold. Stored in jars or crocks, lard and tallow became more than food. They were survival tools. People fried bread, baked pies, and even used them to make soap and candles. The low moisture content meant microbes couldn't thrive, so these fats sat safely in pantries for months. For many, jars of lard were as valuable as money in the bank. Today, they're still prized for flavor and durability in the kitchen. Potting. Potting meat was a clever way to keep it safe before fridges. First, families cooked leftover meat or fish until tender. Then they packed it tightly into jars and poured on a thick seal of fat, lard, tallow, or butter. This fat barrier cut off oxygen, stopping bacteria from sneaking in. The result wasn't just preservation, but transformation. Meat sealed this way often took on the smooth, rich texture of pâté, turning scraps into something special. While it wasn't for year-long storage, it stretched meals for weeks, giving families a reliable protein source in desperate times. For households where nothing could be wasted, potting proved that with fat, patience, and creativity, yesterday's leftovers could become tomorrow's lifeline. Ash storage. Ash might look like nothing but dust, yet it saved countless meals during the Depression. Families discovered that wood ash created a hostile environment for bacteria and fungi, blocking the moisture and oxygen that spoilage thrives on. After thoroughly drying the vegetables, they were layered inside boxes or crates filled with fine ash and stored in cool, dark corners of sheds or basements. Carrots, beets, and even apples stayed surprisingly fresh, sometimes for months. It was one of the cheapest tricks in the book, using what was already left over from the fireplace. For families struggling to stretch harvests through hard winters, this poor man's pantry was a lifeline. Today, it remains a fascinating example of old-world ingenuity worth remembering. Salt curing. Salt was more than seasoning, it was a weapon against decay. Families rubbed meat with heavy layers of salt or packed it into barrels filled with salt and sugar mixtures. Through osmosis, salt pulled moisture out, leaving behind an environment too dry for bacteria to survive. It was a slow process, often taking weeks, but it meant pork, beef, or fish could last months without spoiling. Sometimes the cured meat was smoked afterward for even longer storage. For families who relied on every cut of meat, salt curing was insurance against hunger. The salty slabs weren't just food, they were winter survival. Even now, curing traditions live on, reminding us how something as simple as salt could protect a harvest. Burying in sand. Sand might not seem like food storage, but Depression-era families trusted it to guard vegetables through long winters. Carrots, potatoes, and cabbages were buried in layers of clean, dry sand inside boxes or pits. The sand blocked out light, absorbed extra moisture, and suffocated the bacteria that caused rot. Without sprouting or shriveling, root crops could last months underground, fresh and crisp, when dug up in January or February. Families often called these buried treasures, since finding firm produce during the cold months felt like striking gold. It required no tools beyond a shovel and some patience, but it worked beautifully. For those who couldn't afford ice deliveries or root cellars, sand storage was both affordable and life-saving. Sun drying, the original dehydrator. When electricity wasn't available, the sun was the cheapest and most reliable dehydrator around. Families sliced fruits, tomatoes, and herbs into thin pieces, spread them on boards or screens, and left them to dry under the summer heat. Covered lightly with cloth to keep insects away, the food slowly lost its moisture over several days. This star-powered preservation kept apples chewy, tomatoes leathery, and berries sweet long after harvest. Dried food stored easily in jars or cloth sacks, ready to be rehydrated in winter stews or eaten as snacks. For many households, sun-drying turned fleeting summer harvests into food security. Even today, the method works just as well, proving that sometimes the simplest solutions stand the test of time. Stale bread revival. In hard times, not even stale bread was wasted. Families learned that dryness didn't mean uselessness. It just meant creativity. Rock-hard loaves were soaked in milk or broth, then fried into golden slices known as poor man's French toast. Cubes of bread were baked into pudding with sugar, spices, and scraps of fruit, turning yesterday's leftovers into dessert. Sometimes bread was simmered directly into soups, thickening them into hearty meals. The science was simple. Bread goes stale when it loses moisture, not because it rots, so rehydrating brought it back to life. During the Depression, this trick meant every crumb was stretched to feed hungry mouths. Stale bread revival was proof that even the simplest scraps could be reborn. The Icebox. Before refrigerators, the Icebox ruled the kitchen. This wooden, insulated cabinet held blocks of ice that slowly chilled the food stored alongside them. Delivered by icemen, these blocks could keep meat, milk, and vegetables cool for days. Families managed space carefully, stacking perishables closest to the ice and rotating blocks when they melted. Though it wasn't high-tech, it gave households a fighting chance against spoilage, especially in summer heat. The Icebox represented a bridge between ingenuity and convenience, simple design powered by natural cold. For Depression-era families, it was cheaper than mechanical fridges and more reliable than nothing at all. Even today, the principle lives on in coolers, showing that sometimes old ideas still carry weight. Water bath canning, the acid armory. Before fridges, jars of preserved fruit lined pantry shelves like jewels. Families used water bath canning to lock in summer's bounty. High-acid foods like tomatoes, peaches, or pickles were packed into jars. Lids tightened, and the jars boiled in large pots of water. The heat killed bacteria and sealed the jars, while the natural acidity kept the contents safe for months. Rows of gleaming jars meant families could taste summer sunshine even in the dead of winter. It wasn't fancy equipment, just boiling water and patience. For Depression-era households, this method turned perishable produce into reliable staples. Even today, home canners swear by it as one of the simplest and most rewarding ways to stretch garden harvests year-round. Evaporated milk storage. Milk spoiled quickly without cooling, but families found a way to stretch it. By simmering fresh milk slowly, they reduced its water content and created evaporated milk, thicker, creamier, and much longer lasting. Once sealed in sterilized jars or cans, this milk could sit in pantries for weeks or even months. It became a kitchen staple, used in baking, coffee, soups, or as a stand-in for cream. During the Depression, evaporated milk was more than a convenience. It was survival, ensuring children had access to dairy when fresh supplies weren't possible. Today, it still holds its place on grocery shelves, a reminder of how necessity transformed simple milk into one of the most dependable preserved foods around. Homemade cheese waxing. Cheese was precious in Grandma's day, and preserving it was a must. Families discovered that coating hard cheeses in melted wax created a protective seal that locked out air, moisture, and mold. Once dried, the wax-coated wheels could last for months in cool cellars, providing protein and flavor long after the cheese was made. Waxing didn't just extend shelf life, it gave cheese a smooth, glossy finish and made it easier to handle and transport. During the Depression, this method kept dairy from going to waste and ensured families had a steady supply of nourishing food. Even today, cheese waxing is still practiced by homesteaders and artisans, showing that the simplest tricks often remain the most effective. Molasses preservation. Sugar was scarce in the Depression, but molasses offered a sweet solution. Its thick, sticky texture and high sugar content made it a natural preservative. Families stored fruits like berries or peaches by submerging them in jars of molasses, creating a syrupy treat that resisted spoilage. The sugar created an environment where microbes struggled to survive, locking in flavor and extending shelf life. In some households, vegetables were even glazed or cooked with molasses, which coated and protected them. Beyond preservation, it gave dishes a rich, distinctive sweetness that felt like a luxury in lean times. Molasses preservation wasn't just about saving food, it was about bringing a little comfort and flavor to the table when both were in short supply. Dry salting vegetables. Salt didn't just preserve meat, it worked wonders on vegetables too. Families layered shredded cabbage, beans, or greens with generous handfuls of dry salt in crocks or barrels. The salt pulled water from the vegetables, creating a brine that prevented bacteria and mold from taking hold. Over time, the vegetables softened, took on a tangy flavor, and could be stored for months without refrigeration. This method was especially important for preserving bulk harvests when gardens overflowed. In the winter, salted vegetables could be rinsed, cooked, or mixed into stews, providing vital nutrients long after fresh produce was gone. Dry salting proved that with just one ingredient and some patience, even fragile vegetables could stand the test of time. Potato clamps. When root cellars overflowed, families created potato clamps, outdoor storage mounds built from straw and soil. Potatoes were heaped in piles, covered first with straw for insulation, then with a thick layer of earth. Small vents allowed air circulation while blocking out light and frost. This method kept potatoes firm and edible for months, often through the entire winter. It wasn't just potatoes either. Carrots, beets, and turnips could also be stored in these earthen mounds. The clamp acted like nature's refrigerator, holding steady temperatures despite weather shifts. For families facing food shortages, it meant having reliable carbohydrates on hand. Simple, low-cost, and effective, potato clamps show how resourcefulness once kept households thriving without a single kilowatt. Water glassing eggs. Eggs were abundant in spring but scarce in winter, so families found a way to stretch the supply. Fresh, unwashed eggs were placed pointy-end down in crocks and covered with a water glass solution made from sodium silicate. This liquid sealed the shell's pores, preventing air and bacteria from slipping inside. Properly stored in a cool cellar, eggs could last for months, sometimes up to a year. For families relying on backyard flocks, this method was invaluable, ensuring protein didn't vanish when hens stopped laying. The eggs weren't quite the same as fresh, but they were fried, scrambled, and baked just fine. Water glassing proved that even fragile foods could be carried through the seasons with a little cleverness. Clay pot cooling, Zier pot. In hot, dry climates, Grandma had a clever fridge made of nothing more than clay and water. Known as a Zier pot, this system used two nested clay pots with wet sand packed in between. The inner pot held fruits, milk, or vegetables, while the evaporating moisture from the sand drew heat away, cooling the contents inside. Simple physics made this method incredibly effective, often keeping food fresh for days longer than leaving it out. For Depression-era families without access to ice or refrigeration, it was a game changer. Even today, clay pot cooling is used in parts of the world where electricity is scarce, proving that some of the smartest preservation tools need no power, just earth and water. Crock fermenting and preservation. When harvest came in bulk, Grandma turned to big ceramic crocks. Vegetables like cabbage, cucumbers, or beans were packed layer by layer with salt and pressed until their juices flowed. The brine formed naturally, covering the food and creating the perfect environment for lactic acid bacteria to work their magic. Weeks later, tangy sauerkraut or crunchy pickles emerged, preserved safely without heat or refrigeration. Crocks were large, sturdy, and reusable, making them perfect for storing whole seasons' worth of produce. Families prized this method not only for preservation, but also for the extra nutrition and flavor it added. Even today, crock fermenting is a practical, low-tech way to fill your pantry with vibrant, long-lasting food. Grandma's food tricks weren't just survival, they were pure genius. Which of these methods surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more timeless kitchen wisdom. See you in the next video.